What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Cover 3 podcast. We don't really have an official name for this. It's just kind of a Friday, Thursday chat, long form, something that I wanted to put down so that y'all can find a time to listen to it during the week, during the month, whenever you want to. That something is not so time sensitive. I know a lot of our episodes are still funny to go back and listen to at times and entertaining, but maybe not super relevant to the upcoming week because, again, we're talking about games that are coming up oftentimes as we try to be as forward-looking as possible, so that the shelf life is relatively limited. This is not. I think it's something that would be good to listen to if you're catching this, August, September, October, November, December. Although we might sound smarter in August than than we do come December. And that is my friend Matt Edwards from StatsBomb. Matt, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. This is like a long-time listener, first-time caller, but like first-time guest experience. Been a fan of the Cover 3 podcast for a while, so excited to join you here today.
I appreciate it. So I if we want to, let kind of give folks an introduction about your background in football. Obviously, you're working for StatsBomb now. Okay, what was your path to work for StatsBomb?
Yeah, it's kind of a winding path that mainly just goes through football. So I grew up, my grandpa coached football. He coached college. He coached at BYU for about 40 years. And so was just a diehard like college football fan almost exclusively. Would watch the NFL just because there's no college on Sunday. So would watch that. But grew up just big time college football fan, going to all of my grandpa's games, and then eventually got a chance to play at BYU, walked on there. And when I was there, decided like, I love football. I want to be in football for the rest of my life. So with my grandpa being a coach, I thought that was going to be my path. So I started coaching, was a graduate assistant at BYU when I finished. I got a job at a D3 where I coached offensive line, coached receivers, was the interim head coach. The small school deal where you're recruiting coordinator, you're painting the fields, you're doing everything. So I had a good experience there, learned a ton. And then actually when Bronco took the job at UVA, was able to join back up with him there, moved into an analyst role and kind of moved into the analytics side of things, and eventually became the director of football analytics while I was there. And then, when he resigned, started looking around at what my future held and what I wanted to do to stay in the game of football. And StatsBomb was just starting a football product and wanted to join up with them and help kind of build this product from the ground up and see where we took it. So about 2 years ago, took a job with StatsBomb.
Nice, man. So we'll get into StatsBomb here in a minute. I am curious because we're recording this late on Thursday, and New Mexico kicked off. Obviously, Bronco is now there at New Mexico. Were you surprised how much success they were able to have in a week 0 game with a new staff and a very much rebuilt roster?
I was a little bit interested to see what it looked like. They had, I think it was 42 new transfers. They only returned 2 starters on the offensive side of the ball, especially. So I was intrigued. Obviously with my background with them, I know how they game plan. I know how they set up. And so their system is a really unique system, and I think is actually set up really well for the kind of state that we're in right now with transfers and getting people to play early and the ability to kind of like disseminate knowledge to a high level. And so especially offensively, I think they're able to do a lot of kind of unique things with not a lot of learning time and teaching time. Defensively, it's one of those things where it's, as an offensive guy, I always say it's just like see ball, get ball. Like there's not as much of the hard training. It's just kind of read and react. Obviously you can do some things to teach them and have them be better prepared for opponents. But it is one of those sides that comes a little bit easier for a new staff. So I thought he would be kind of uniquely set up to have success, or at least, a level of play, a high level of play early on.
I was impressed by just the multitude of formations they were breaking out and just the different concepts. Like this is a lot to have installed by week 0. So I was pretty proud of them.
Yeah, it puts a lot of stress. I mean, mainly on the quarterback. There's only so much you can do to take things off their plate. And so if you add a whole ton of formations and motions and shifts and all the kind of stuff that they're doing. It can be a lot to overwhelm the quarterback, but I thought he played really well for a young guy in that system week one. It's that FCS program, but they're a legit FCS program. They could, beat a lot of FBS teams. And so I thought he did pretty well.
No doubt about it. So let's talk a little stat bomb. What is the general rundown that the audience at home should know, about Stats Bomb?
Yeah, so for Stats Bomb, I know this is primarily a college football podcast, but I'm sure that the fandom does at least leak over into the NFL side a little bit. And so if you've seen any of the next gen stats or heard about the tracking data at the NFL level, that's done by wearables that these players have little chips in their shoulder pads. There's a chip in the ball. What we are doing is we're kind of recreating that data for the college level from video. And so we use computer vision and AI software mixed with manual intervention to tag the data to create this tracking data that really gives a really deep data set for these colleges. They've had some data around and some people are using it better than others, but not this level of data and not this kind of broad depth of data. We have the NFL, we have college. We recently were acquired by Huddle, who, you obviously know, and fans of the recruiting side of things have heard of Huddle. I think it's 99% of high school teams have Huddle. And so for us to be able to bring tracking data to that level is really exciting. So we're going to be able to track the progress of these players all the way from, their freshman or sophomore year in high school, all the way through the NFL. Like it's going to be incredible. And we're really excited for that.
That is just something I'm really looking forward to be able to see, like approximate mile an hour, and also like reactionary speeds to some of the spatial stuff that's going to be pretty insane, man. If you're a college team, and let me know when you want to share screen here, but what are some of the things that you get access to? Not necessarily the public, but maybe at some point someday. But like if you're a college team, through your Huddle suite, what are you able to see, and how much of a difference can it make for you?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do at StatsBomb, obviously, I just talked about like our data and how it's the deepest data set in the world. The old CEO who just sold the company, he started this soccer product, and he was a director of soccer analytics, and so he worked with teams and was like, this data is terrible. I'm going to create better data and make it better for coaches. With my work at UVA and my understanding of the coaching world, that's where my mindset comes from, as well as it's not just like, hey, we have this awesome data. Good luck, coaches and personnel guys. It's we have this data and we're going to help you make sense of it. So yeah, I've got some stuff pulled up if you want to share that up for us. Yeah. So what we've done is we have this, super deep data set, like I said, but then we're able to create a ton of different visual tools for coaches and things that can help them better understand the data, especially when they're doing like early on prep. And so, we've got New Mexico pulled up here and some of the things that I want to talk about. But, one of the things that I think is super cool that we have that nobody else has is this like passing placement data. So this is actually where the ball hits the receiver. And so for somebody like Devin last week, I think he went like 18 for 24 or something. But you can see there are like 3 or 4 of these that were right on the money that weren't complete. And so he had, I think there were 3 drops. But if you take a look at this for a young kid, really accurate with his passes. And so this is something that I think is super cool. And you can get a quick view of, all right, well, what happened, when we were throwing the ball, what can we learn from this? And so this is something that you literally cannot get anywhere else. And we think it's really cool. And some of the NFL teams are like, man, you guys have this. This is amazing. Like, I wish we had this for all our guys too.
So with this, like, let's say I'm a coach, can I sort of like layer over different filters to this, right? For instance, like, receiver stationary or receiver, running across or away from me, or, maybe like, hey, every time I'm throwing to the right, I'm opening differently, right? Like my my accuracy is different than when I'm throwing to, I mean, famously, there's some guys that are somehow way more accurate throwing, to one side of the field or another, which can oftentimes be a, mechanical thing or footwork. But like, well, okay, yeah, we do have a lot of filters here. This is kind of dope.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of these filters. We can do like drop back depth, time to throw, pocket location. I think is a really interesting one, and we can talk some about. I think it was still him, but when he leaves the pocket to his right, what does that look like? That updates really, obviously right away. When he's leaving the pocket to his left, he didn't throw any. So that's kind of some of the stuff that you could use in game planning as well as you're, getting ready to game plan against guys. But when you talk about like depth of target, you can quickly update that. So it's, hey, some of our deeper throws, what does that look like? We're consistently adding new, these are like our global filters, we call them, that affect each one of our tools. So we're continuing to add some of those to each of our pages. But this is like one of our oldest pages, but I think it ties into like the passing chart here. So you can see his passing chart, like where they actually ended up, which I think is kind of common. But when you talk about like pass paths, so where the quarterback actually was when he threw that ball, and that's something that you can look at here. Like when we talk about throwing right to left, he's someone that had, I think, 6 of his 8 incompletions were to his right-hand side. I think you can take a look at it. So like what impacted those, this is for our coaches that we're sharing. This is not to like replace any sort of film study. It's to help them as they're getting ready to film study. Like, all right, what are things that I can be looking for, expect when I'm looking at this? So that's one of the things that you're talking about. It's like, okay, relative to pass origin, is this to the field? Is this to the boundary? All that stuff you can take a look at when we're looking at like targets, when he's targeting slot guys versus wide receivers. You can look at individual. Like I was surprised that this Luke Wysong kid, he had a really good game. You can quickly look at each one of their targets and it'll update throughout the season. Obviously this is just one game, so it's, you get 4 or 5 dots, but all of that is here in the data. I think it's super informational and you can learn a ton about it.
So I'm able to, that's, I think it's also helpful, like you said, as far as, prepping for film, but you can have your film people be like, hey, I get cut ups ready of all this in order so I can watch them with the kid, like all these situations. But I know a lot of teams have now with Huddler or with whoever their provider is, right? Like they have a lot of ways to filter the data, especially if you could integrate, film with these dots, right? Like eventually if I'm like, hey, I click on that dot, I can see it. Or if you guys already have it, right?
We have it. It's not necessarily something that we share with a ton of people, but you can see it's up there. You click on the dots and it pulls up the video here. So that's something that, like, especially for our teams and our client uses, like they're always wanting to get back to the video. And so we want to put that in as many of our tools as we can for them, because the marriage of data and video and like the actual football thing, I think, is where our stuff really takes off and it actually gets traction with these coaches.
Nice, man. What else can you do with this tool?
We can, I know it's maybe a little bit too soon for you, but talking about like passing charts, it brought to mind our guy from the first half last week. So you can, this is time, quarter, first and second quarter. And this is for DJ last week. Not a single pass over 8 yards. And I, as we was kind of getting ready and watching stuff this morning, each one of these 5 or 6 dots is just hitches, whether it was an RPO hitch or a free action or a, like free access, corners at 12 yards, take a hitch, easy throw. Just, really warming up quick warming up slow to the season this year. So I thought that was really interesting, and prepping for this real quick.
Yeah, that was not a great game.
No.
For Florida State. I mean, for Georgia Tech, it was awesome. They had a really good plan, and I felt like they just kind of like, if you're playing paper rock scissors, they just kind of stayed ahead of them, almost every time, which was awesome, for them.
Yeah, and I think it shows something. We obviously Georgia Tech was all about running the ball. You get the little like meme of coach at the end of the game, run the ball.
Oh, Brent Key, yeah.
And so, like, with that, I think it's interesting how much they ran the ball and how that really limited possessions. I know that's something that you talked about the other day, but I think that's going to be one of the new kind of interesting things to think about this year with rule changes. With headsets, our team's going to go faster? Are they going to go slower? And so that's something that I'm going to be really interested in taking a look at. But we're talking about teams that ran, obviously like Georgia Tech. We were talking about them. This is one of our tools I think is really cool. It integrates a bunch of our data with especially the offensive line and where teams are running the ball. So like this little orange line, I think the league average this last year was just under like 5.5 yards or something. But Georgia Tech was up almost at 9 yards per rush. You can take a look at these like super heavy success on the right-hand side. Big gains, lots of success. And so each one of these dots has a little bit more information in them. But as our coaches are prepping for teams, a lot of times they're watching film. They'll watch a 200 play cut up to say like, okay, what is this team? What are they doing? What can we try and get ready for? Are they run? Are they pass? Where do they run? And if we can get them some information like this, where it's like, all right, well, they're running a lot to the right-hand side and they had a lot of success with it, that can make it so their film watching takes it to, the next level of they're no longer watching film to try and get an understanding of who that team is. They have an understanding from the data already and from some of these tools. And then they can really dive into, okay, well, how are they doing it? And take their, Sunday, Monday watching film to where they're usually at on like a Tuesday or Wednesday in their like game planning process.
Matt, it occurs to me that you could add player filters in, right? Like, so when X player is in, here's the chart. Let's overlay it with when that player is not in, right? With an injury type situation.
Yeah, so we can do ball carrier. We've got all of the like data for the offensive line as well. And so I don't think they had many plays that weren't these guys, but they have, a couple guys played left tackle. So you could do that. And as you're prepping like for a full season, like if we go back to last season's data, you can really do this. This is something that was really interesting as we were getting ready to watch this. We'll move on to like another tool so this is from like the run tendencies, but from the pass game. So this was Michigan last year. They had their kind of normal starting lineup, but then when Zinter went down, they had to move Carson in to play right guard. And then you can pull up their next guy, and then you can get that right away of like what's happening, what can we expect to happen. And instantly, like he played okay at right guard, but you can see they were probably sliding to him to help him, right? And left Trevor, one-on-one, maybe left Drake one-on-one too. So where you can see, okay, well, he himself wasn't bad, but they were doing things to protect him. And so you can, the ability to input players, like you're saying, that's there and can give people an idea. Because often it's like, okay, if you don't have this data, it's all right, well, he's down. I'm going to have a GA go through and spend 5 hours looking for all plays where he is not the right guard, or and then what's that look like? And just the amount of time that you can save is amazing.
As I watch this, it's like there's kind of two buckets, right? There's the efficiency bucket, which, your use of time, and then there's kind of the insight bucket. Like what can you learn, but also like how does it help you actually hunt for the film examples, is another there. When you were talking about like trends over the course of the season, I was thinking about like Virginia Tech last year. When they started out with Wells, they did things very differently once they finally went to drones. And like we talked about this a lot in Cover 3. It's hard to pick a quarterback, even if you end up like having a really good one. You don't always know it. Even like really, really good coaches have botched this multiple. Like Whittingham has picked like the clear wrong guy twice. Bobby Bowden has like two pretty clear examples where it's just definitely the wrong guy. Saban probably has two. I think Urban Meyer's probably got one. Like, you're talking about like the best coaches in our lifetimes. After having a month of practice with a guy, picking somebody who's just clearly not as good, like in the same year on the same team, and then they put the other guy, and it's like, oh, wow. Like, I don't know if it's just because it's hard to simulate game conditions in practice, but if you're a coach and you're looking at something like playing Va Tech after they made the swap was a little bit different than when they had Wells.
Yeah, and that's something that coaches they say, all right, each coach does it a little bit differently. I think a common tendency is to say, let me see either the last 4 games in a breakdown or the games that run a similar scheme to us, right? Or all conference games. And so for us, you're able to quickly come through here, select the games that you want to watch, and then it'll, update as you're looking at the whatever tool it is. And so, or, when we're talking like passing chart, this is now from last season for the Hokies. Each one of these is, Grant Wells obviously didn't throw a ton, but you're able to quickly update those and get a quick feel for, all right, well, it's this quarterback versus that quarterback. Just pulling this up, this is really interesting. One of the things that I love about our tools is like heat map thing, so you can quickly say, all right, well, where are they actually throwing it? Obviously, a bunch of dots, you can kind of get a feel for like, oh, it looks like there are a bunch at the bottom here, but you can see it quickly. A lot of screens, a lot of quick passes, especially to the right. All right, what are we seeing there? You could do it by target too, which I think is really cool, especially for our DB coaches. They love doing this, where it's, all right, what, if I can quickly get a feel for where people are targeting specific receivers. And, for them, they're those defensive guys. I feel like they don't get enough credit. I did make a joke about the defensive guys, about how it's just like see ball, get ball, but their entire breakdown and their entire how they watch film is it's all analytical. It's easy math, right? For those people who are like analytical, but it's all numbers based, like run pass percentage, route percentage, all this stuff. And so for them, they eat this stuff up like almost to a T. When we start with the staff, it's the defensive coaches who are like, man, I love this stuff. Like all this information, like they cannot get enough of it.
I think in part because your ability to classify things via formation, some of the motion capture stuff, and then spit out tendencies. Like when they do this, this, and this, we're usually getting this, right? Like that's you're going to watch those first, and then, what are the counters off that? What does it look like when they don't do that out of that look? Is there some kind of tell, off a very limited sample when they're not doing, this or that off a look? That to me makes a lot more sense. Whereas, not that you don't do that with offense. I mean, like defenses are going to tip their blitzes somewhat and tip some of their, the way they're going to roll coverages somewhat. But I feel like offense probably more.
Yeah, to me, I've always thought of offense as more of like an art, right? It's like, what do we do well? What can we do? How do we get certain players the ball? Like the offensive players and coaches, they control the paintbrush of what's happening on the field, right? They're running the show, and the defense is more of a science. It's like, all right, it's 3rd and 8, and we're in the red zone. Now, all my percentages tell me that this is the most likely play. How are we going to defend against that? And, for the defense can obviously do a whole bunch of stuff, but it's so dependent on offense. And so, yeah, I think that offense is more of an art when they're getting ready for stuff. And so some of the stuff they love as well. Like they do get some tendencies, and especially again, it's the guys you wouldn't think, like the O-line coaches who are, some of the biggest, scariest guys are also really into this stuff of like, they're starved for data just because it's hard. Most companies don't have any information about those guys up front. And so when they see some of that stuff that we showed, like the run tendencies, the line pressures, like they love that stuff too.
Nice, man. So looking at some route tree stuff here, it's pretty neat.
Yeah. So through our data, we're able to save time from somebody going through and tagging, 4 or 5 routes per play. It's something that we have a model that will basically spit out what route is being run by the track that was taken. And then we've built this tool to help DB coaches. There's a bunch of data here that, some are really interested in. But the thing that's nice, again, with all of our customizable things, is that you can come here and talk about, hey, I'm a coach that's really interested in catch rate over expected. So this is for Malik Neighbors last year. And this was actually something that we found pretty interesting about Jaden Daniels, is like all of his in-breaking routes had higher catch rate over expected than his out-breaking routes that he was throwing. And so I think some of it is who's running those routes, who he's targeting. But the ability to quickly say, all right, I'm interested in catch rate over expected, and let's say like catch separation. So you can quickly pull up this data, make these visual tools show you whatever you're interested in. But then also being able to say, okay, I'm interested in when this player lines up at slot versus when they line up out wide. That to be able to hand this to one of your players would be super interesting. But then also to be able to hand it to, somebody that is using this as like a breakdown for an opponent, I think would be really, is something that they have loved and something that I thought would be really cool too.
I mean, that's something that just, even with the new helmet comps now, right? Like you could be telling, one of your guys who's got the green dot, hey, if the ace shifts over here into the slot, like you're probably getting this or that, right? That's if you got that information top of mind.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder like how these defensive coaches are going to use that. I think in the NFL it's usually like a middle linebacker, right? I haven't heard of who it's going to be at this level, but I feel like if I were a coach and I was really concerned, I would probably move that thing around. If I had a bunch of players that I could trust, I would say, all right, this game, I'm super worried about an individual player or an individual formation. And so I'm going to give it to our safety. So I'm going to talk to him all game, be like, all right, look for this player, look for where Neighbors is. Like if I can find some big tendencies, I'm going to want to talk to somebody that can take advantage of that. So I would probably move that around a little bit. If I'm Colorado, I'd probably give that thing to Travis Hunter and be like, maybe not, but he plays well enough on his own, so maybe he doesn't need it. But I'd want to talk to my like biggest playmaker and just be, what are you seeing out there? Let's talk. Let's make this a communication to where we can do everything we can to stop these guys.
With the route tree tendencies too. I mean, you can also make not like just outright decision, but you can sort of hedge a little bit of your alignment stuff. Like if a guy shows an inability to make certain catches because of angle, or maybe just like his fundamentals are poor in certain areas, right? Like, so his catch rate over expected is really low on certain routes, but pretty good on others. I mean, you're shading maybe a half step in either direction to sort of dare him to run that route that he's not quite as good at. I mean, with respect to where your coverage is, but
yeah, and I think this is from Singleton from this year, the little receiver from Georgia Tech, and he didn't have a ton of routes thrown just because they were running the ball every play. But something that I thought was really interesting, you can take this like snap distribution and lay over the routes that were actually run there. And so for someone like him, you take a look at this and it's like, oh, there's a bunch of squiggles. But if I'm like, all right, when he is lined up into the boundary as the slot receiver, he is coming back across the formation, usually in motion to some degree. So that's one of those things where you're like, all right, if he lines up there, you don't have to like go out and press him and worry about him. It's the same thing, I think, from over here, right? The majority of time he's coming back into the formation. So that's the kind of thing where you can, if we're going to talk about alignment and different tendencies and things that we can do, we can tell those coaches, hey, if he's lined up in the slot, you can talk to whether it's your nickel or your Sam backer or your Will backer. He doesn't have to worry about that because he's going to come back into the formation. He can keep his eyes to, the backfield or whatever other tendencies and keys you have for him. But he's not going to have to worry about that, because Singleton, he's, one of their best receivers. You'd think he would want a lot of attention. But if you can take some of that guesswork out of the game, it can help you focus on other more important things for sure.
So let's galaxy brain this for a second. After watching what Michigan did last year, where they showed relatively little, I mean, you're a former defensive coach. Oregon and Ohio State this year. I mean, Oregon's going to open, not that this is a gambling episode, obviously, but they're going to be 3 or more touchdown favorites in their first 5 ball games before a certain team named Ohio State comes to Eugene there on October 12th. Like, are you being, now that you know how smart this tech is, are you being extra conscious, like not to show things in games if you're running a team, or are you working like a lot more on tendency breakers as you prep up for that game?
Yeah, that is definitely a decision that gets talked about. And then there's also the kind of understated, maybe you don't talk about it because you don't want to jinx it. If you're like, all right, we're 30-point favorites, let's not put in any of our good stuff. Some of that's like understood as your game planning. Some of it is understood. You'll be 4 or 5 weeks in the year and you're like, wow, we have some major tendencies. What are we going to do about that? If you're a pretty well established staff, you're going to do some things to break tendencies. And you're going to take advantage of those games where you are big favorites, where you don't have to pull out your, best stuff, right? You can, throw it to whoever else, let's say to a degree, you want to be able to work your guys in, like Evan Stewart, you're going to want to work him into the offense. You're going to want to see how he fits in, but you're also not going to want to be like, all right, we need to lean on him. We need to, really squeeze all the juice out of him that we can before you're playing, your big game against Ohio State. So I think there is a little bit of that game within the game, we used to call it, of how are you going to make sure that the other team can't figure out what you're doing while also doing everything you can to win and put everybody in the right situation. Like there's a lot to think about for sure.
No doubt about it. This is neat. What else we got? I know. I mean, I've played around with this tool for a long time. It is pretty cool. Where do you want to go now?
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was, we're going to talk a little bit about everybody's favorite defense, but it's easy to talk about this stuff when you find kind of random things you think are really neat. And so, Cooper DeJean last year, obviously super successful season, everybody's kind of favorite player on Iowa. Something I was like, let's take a look at how he's lining up, what he's doing. Does he press? Does he not? You can get a feel for that with the snap distribution. I was like, man, this is so weird. He plays so much here on the right-hand side on like his right-hand side, but not a lot on this other side. Like, what's going on? And I was playing around with it a little bit. I was like, maybe I'll, take a look at it by game. Sure enough, it's one game he lined up to this side against Purdue. Because Deion Burks was only on the left side of the formation. And so I was like, all right, we got to do something, right? This is one of their best players. What can we do? You know what? We're going to stick one of our best players on that. And that's one of the things we talk about, like the game within the game. This is not something that Iowa would have shown at all. Like, you take a look at every game. Let's select all their games except for that Purdue game. Purdue's probably coming in thinking, all right, Cooper DeJean only lines up on one side of the ball, and that's opposite our best player. We're golden. We're sweet. Let's set up some plays against their, worst nickel guy. Let's set up some double moves. What are we going to do? Then, Iowa obviously comes in and completely flips the switch. And that's one of the things that's like, it's really, I love the analytics side of things, and I love talking about how stats can help games. But really, like, if a team does something different or does something that is not expected, like, that's where it's hard to find like truly predictive things that are 90% or 100%. Like, it's hard to even do stuff with data that is really good.
I mean, I think it's a great compliment to Burks that Iowa is a team that basically never travels its best corner, and they're like, yeah, for this one, you're going to travel.
Yeah, and obviously Cooper is really successful. Like, obviously, getting a chance to play in the NFL and going to be really good, so you can do that stuff with him. But if you don't have that ability, that's going to be hard to prep for. And that's where I think, like, if Iowa had the headsets last year, this would have been a game where I'd be like, all right, let's put it in Cooper's helmet. We can talk to him. Hey, make sure you don't play on this side very much, but this is what we can expect. Or when you're over there, look for when Deion goes into motion. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, like, it's easy to say, like, oh yeah, we got the headsets this year, it's going to be great. You can talk to the quarterbacks, and it obviously shuts off 15 seconds before the play call or whatever. But between that and the video playback system from the tablets on the sideline, like, coaches are going to have so much more access to in-game information than they did in the past. And so I'm really, intrigued to hear how that goes for these teams for this season.
Not that you would ever, scout players on other rosters for transfer portal purposes, but if a player did happen to hop in the transfer portal and you had the player pre-scouted, just through all the data available, I wonder if teams can use this to find like undervalued assets. Maybe guys who their fit is not really what the home team was doing, but maybe like the destination team does something differently, and in a smaller sample set, that player said like, "Oh, whoa! Like he actually is pretty good at doing what he may be not great at doing what they do, but he's actually pretty good in the thing that we do."
Yeah. So one of the things that we have, and we talk about from our product, we have the deepest data in the country. I could say that like a million times. So what does that actually mean? A lot of data companies have data that maybe touches one area of a program. Like it's really good for the strength and conditioning, or this is a really good recruiting software. But for us, we have data that affects so many different areas. So when you talk about like the recruiting side of things, we have this player comparison tool, which I think is amazing. And what it does is it basically takes any player in the country, and the initial page brings back like the 5 most common players from that year. So like this is something that was London Humphreys. He did not play that much last season, right? For Vandy. It's Vandy, right? So if I were just kind of a casual college football fan, I would have been shocked that he was like a super heavy target in the transfer portal, that this, random kid from Vandy that didn't play much. But it's because of, tools like this where I can go quickly say, all right, he had, let's say 45 targets. He had 20 catches last year. That's, I mean, maybe at Vandy, that's really good. And I think that's the point of this tool is like, you can learn some stuff from it. But we have these like radars for every player by every position. And so you get like a trait radar. So it's how they play the position. Do they line up out wide? What's their separation look like? Their depth of target, maybe some stuff that they don't necessarily have control over, right? But it's like how they play the position. But then on the right-hand side, we have these performance radars, and it gives you kind of the most important and impactful stats by that position. So we have these built for receiver, running back, quarterback, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, defensive back. Oh, this tight end one. That's like brand new. I didn't even know we had it. This is amazing.
You didn't know about a tight end one?
I've been begging for it for so long. And it's one of those things I've given up hope that it would actually go in, but now it's there. I have faith in our company again. But so we have these radars that are built, and then for every player, we can do a comparison. So these are the most common players, but then also we can choose players, which I think is really neat. So if it's somebody that's like, all right, we have these 5 receivers in the transfer portal that we're really interested in, I'll just pull up like, guys that are in the NFL now, but are not necessarily transfer guys. But like, I'm looking at these 4 or 5 receivers. What can I learn about each one of these guys, right? How are they similar? How are they different? One of the next things that we're going to put in here is that like through our tracking data, we collect what we call physical metrics. So it's like the speed, the acceleration, that kind of stuff, max speed, max acceleration. We try to contextualize them for some positions as well. Like for defensive ends, we have like a get off measurement. For receivers, we have a deep speed. For DBs, we have like a closing speed. So being able to put those in the radars as well, like we're pretty excited about what that looks like. But you're able to quickly analyze, hey, I have these 5 receivers that I'm excited about in the transfer portal, whatever December 14th or whatever day it opens. It's like, bam, there's 200 receivers in the transfer portal. Who are we going to target? What does that look like? How did they play? What kind of information can I get quickly? Because as you know, like that stuff, that happens fast. They're in the portal Monday. Sometimes there's a little bit of stuff that goes on behind the scenes and they sign also on Monday, but shocker. But even if they don't, like, even if everybody's playing above the board, like, they want to know they got to get enrolled. They got to get stuff figured out. So it's usually within a couple of days. So you better be able to move fast if you're one of these teams looking for some good information for transfer portals.
Have y'all thought about deceleration?
So it's something that we've talked about, and we actually recently put together a video for a strength and conditioning staff in the NFL from a team that was really high on Lad McConkey. And so I think especially when you look at like these receivers, right? How well do they get in and out of breaks? And so for us, we put together this video that talked about like, we could really like nerd out with some strength and conditioning guys. It's like, what's their acceleration phase? What's their deceleration phase? How quickly are they able to move from like a stop position back to max speed? And so that's something that like we're kind of in the early stages. Like we just finished what our basic physical metrics look like over the past couple of months. And now it's all right. We've added some things by position. For receivers, we did some deep route speed. And so that kind of like breaking, break point in and out of breaks, whatever we're going to call it. That's one of our next ones. And similar to like running backs, like how well do they accelerate through the hole? There's so much stuff that you can do with it that, we're really excited to dive in. And so are the coaches that we're talking to.
Reason I asked, I right before I changed jobs and came over to CBS and 24/7, I was with another company and I was working on a project that we never ran because I left. But I was at this lab that does a lot of the body dots and whatnot and all, like the mocap, and they had a bunch of like pro athletes that would come and work out there in the off season, the force plates and all that kind of stuff. And the guy had made a comment and he was like, the crazy thing is like James Harden is, compared to you and me, is a fantastic athlete. Yeah. Compared to all of the other NBA players, he's not, with the exception of one area in which he's relative to height and weight, like 99th percentile, and it was deceleration. And it kind of changed how I thought about the tight end and like slot guys, right? I mean, how often do you need your tight end? I mean, the best tight ends are athletic enough to run fast, but on most plays, like, are they actually reaching top speed and for how long? Like a lot of it's, how do you create separation underneath? Acceleration, but also deceleration,
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Like I was just I remember we were watching the Super Bowl and there was the play that they threw to Travis Kelce kind of at the end of the game. And he was like actually running away from Fred Warner, who's, one of the most athletic players of the NFL. And I like immediately, like I was just with my wife, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen him run that fast. And so recently I was putting together a study and a report for some guys that work in the NFL office. And I did a study using our fastest, our top speed stuff with Travis Kelce. And that was like 2 miles per hour faster than any other play he had that season. Because it was
much.
Yeah. It's a Taylor Swift bump as well as the adrenaline. I don't know what it is, but I think that one of the things that we've talked recently to a bunch of coaches is when you talk about motion, like I think Andy Kotelnicki gets a bunch of credit and like what they're doing with the Miami Dolphins. I know this is college mainly, but the amount of like chaos you can create with motion. And so not just saying, okay, we know putting this motion that can impact his player guarding him, but with the tracking data, you can be like, all right, if we move one player in motion, maybe from like, let's say we're in a 2x2 formation with a tight end attached to the boundary. If we bring that other receiver in motion, that's going to make 5 or 6 guys adjust and move. And that's really just a really easy motion for us. Like, what's the craziest thing that we can do to a defense that's still super easy for us? And when you have that tracking data, you can talk about like the actual movement and the actual like adjustments that teams have to make pre-snap without even having to watch anything. Like that's just in the data. And
you guys have the like you can watch a play.
Yeah. So we have like a play animation, like the dots that people talk about in the NFL. So we've got that here. I actually, this is just a random play pulled up, so I don't know which one this is, but and it's, we could really like nerd out on exactly how we're collecting and what that looks like. But, we've got the dots, passes over here to 24, a couple of tackles, goes out of bounds. But each one of these is we collect the data of the tracking data, but then we're also collecting 40 or 50 events every play. So it's like pre-snap motion, at the ball is snapped, a handoff, a fake handoff, a block by an offensive lineman, a tackle attempt, you know, pitch, anything that you could think of. Like, we captured that exact location of everybody. And so that's where we're starting to dive in a little bit more to like the separation at the time the ball is thrown, the separation at any point in a route, and all that information. It's all right there.
I mean, from that, you could also probably you could probably get separation from like estimated time of decision, right? I mean, first movement of the delivery, I guess. If you could drill it, like, which would kind of, there's some differentiating factors there as far as like how quick the guy is to deliver the ball, and ball speed.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I think is really interesting. One of my like goals in analytics, a personal goal, is to take everything that you ask a player to do and come up with some way to quantify it. The first one that I have done and feel really good about is for an edge rusher. So they have like 3 things that they're asked to do. One is, an edge rusher will almost never be unblocked, right? So it's not just like get to the quarterback as fast as you can. It's get to the blocker as fast as you can. Like, you want to get to the blocker before the blocker can get to his spot. Beat the blocker, so get off the block, and then finish to the quarterback. And so for us, we've taken that first one. How quickly can you get onto a block? So we have the time from the snap. We have like get off, which you talk about, but then we also collect every timestamp that a block happens. Then how quickly can you get off that block? Like, I heard defense, it's always like get off blocks and make tackles. Well, we actually collect that data. So we call it average length of engagement is our like data point for all offensive linemen and defensive linemen. And so, that's the next thing. And then the last thing is like, how quickly then can you get to the quarterback, or how well do you finish the pass rush? So, we talk about like pressures versus sacks. And so, there's a bunch of ways I can talk about that, but we talk about like average length of engagement. I think it was Latu from last year was one of the only players that was really good at at getting off blocks in both the pass game and the run game. And so he's someone, obviously I think was he the first defensive player
I think so,
in the draft. But that's the kind of data that like the NFL teams love. They're like, man, that's amazing to be able to, talk to a coach in a way that they're like, all right, you say you want your defensive edges to get off blocks. Well, here's the data point for that we can actually measure what that looks like. You talk about decision making for a quarterback. That's really hard. But if you can kind of narrow it down to, all right, once you see that guy is open, or after the break point, I want you to throw that as fast as you can. We have that data for like, okay, the quarterback has made, or the receiver has made his move, throw it to him now. And so you talked a little bit about the like motion capture stuff. This was a few years ago. I was at UVA and somebody had come to me and they're like, hey, we have this, we want to put a bunch of dots on your quarterbacks and track their, throwing mechanics. We've had a ton of success on the baseball side. I was like, I believe you that you've had success on the baseball side. And that's because they're about 30 years into the data revolution. I was like, we have 20 steps to go before this like quarterback stuff we can really dive in. Like we've got to take some baby steps. Yeah.
Like nobody is, nobody's trying to hit them on the mouth. Right. And they like, yeah, that just seems so much harder to do.
Yeah. It's, I think the collective football universe is catching up, but we still got a ways to go.
Have you thought about, and I didn't prep you for this, but just watching these dots, it kind of comes to mind that like play caller leverage created. So for instance, like how often is a play caller on offense using formation or motion or whatever to, to create a look where even though the defense takes like the pursuit takes like reasonable, route efficiency of pursuit, where they're still getting blocked just because, like you're just setting up good angles. In high school, we played wing T and we knew just like if the defense gave us this look, they're just dead, right? Like there's certain plays you just know, like if they don't get out of the angles, we're just going to watch them, like, and we're running all day. I wonder, can we track that? Like if I'm a head coach, maybe like a guy like James Franklin, right, who is notable for hiring guys outside of his coaching tree. Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's not. I mean, he's won a million games, so generally, by my estimation, it's work. But like, can I track that? And I wonder if it's like especially useful for a coach who doesn't have a great talent advantage, at least according to like us 24/7 Sports, but he's consistently getting good looks by what he's doing to confuse the defense.
I think that's really interesting because I do think there's that like kind of coach world. Hey, we should be paying attention to this coach. I think somebody like that is Brendan Marion right now, the OC at UNLV. He's someone that's kind of created a unique offense, and in the coaching world, people are like, all right, let's pay attention to that. But that's something that like could take 2 or 3 years to build up that level of, cachet if you're a coach. But if you are able to get some information and identify one of those guys, I think if you're a Penn State and you can identify one of those guys early and have him come in to be like a tight ends coach, like I think that would be huge. Because if you're one of those top jobs, you're probably going to hire a pretty well-known guy, right?
Yeah.
But if you can get one of those kind of really clever, it's a different scenario, but you talk about what USC did, hiring North Dakota State's head coach to come in, be a position coach. It's that kind of thing. If you can get somebody to be that clever, that creative, and coming in to be a position coach, like I think there could be a huge advantage there. But you talk about like some of the things, what can teams do? What can we measure about like how well teams scheme things up? Because we're collecting the actual blocks. I remember there was a tweet recently that Mina Kimes had put out. It was like, I don't know the data, but whoever I think it was the Seahawks that she was talking about, like whoever the DC is seems to get the most unblocked pressures in the NFL. And I was like, well, we actually do have the data for that. And so I think that's one of the things that you can like quantify. You look at like Manny Diaz, tons of success as a DC, mixed results as a head coach so far. Excited to see what happens at Duke. But I think Penn State last year led college football in unblocked pressures, right? Like what is it? What is he doing? How is he able to continue to do that? If you're a coach who's looking to hire somebody like that, like you can pull up those clips, but there are some ways that you can mess around with the data to get some ideas. I hadn't really thought about that one, but defensively, that was one that I had thought about. That's like, you could. I'd also taken a look at like most wide open passes.
Yes, some of those are one on nuns for like some guys. I feel like are better at scheming to create like coverage busts.
Yeah,
and some guys are better to scheme more like it because they want to create really advantageous ISOs.
Yeah,
like there's different coordinators do. Like I thought, Riley when he was at Oklahoma, and obviously at least some at USC, they would frequently have guys running just nobody on.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like that's he figures out whatever your coverage adjustments are and attacks them, like plans to attack it. Whereas other guys, like, damn, like how the hell did they get receiver one on corner who should be playing FCS again? Like that's just
Yeah, I will say as a coach, every once in a while you'll find something Monday and you're like, we did it. We found our golden nugget. We're going to attack this guy and it works out great on Saturday. And you feel like you are playing God out there. You're like, we've done it. We have solved the game of football and we're going to go undefeated. But yeah, I think there's a ton of potential there. So I think that's super interesting.
No doubt, man. We'll have to have you back on to talk maybe playoff contenders or something so we can kind of examine what they're doing as the season evolves. Is there anything else we want to hit today?
No, just ready for college football. I'm having coached and played. I have a bunch of friends that are still coaching, and so my fandom goes from like a favorite team, BYU growing up. That's where I played, and now I'm like, man, I got 15 games I got to watch and make sure I'm staying up to date. So I've played a bunch of their teams on the college football video game, and now it's going to be exciting to watch them.
Nice, man. All right, I'll pick up the sticks and get you on there.
Give me a little bit to play defense. I've played like almost exclusively offense so far, so
We,
I need a
we need
little
some
time.
Tats bomb in EA, man. This is like that defense is still pretty hard to play.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Awesome, Matt. Enjoyed it, buddy.